Thank Phil for having me and apologize because Phil was my first boss out of university. And I think when I was about 21, I worked with him at Leap magazine in Beijing, and I doubt I was the best employee in the world. But working there and working with Phil and like following everything he's done has really taught me about the importance of culture as a person-to-person experience, not necessarily at a massive scale, not what is recognized in every magazine or television show, but just the act of having conversations and trying to make things happen like this, like Leap, like an exhibition in Beijing. So I really appreciate that. Is there the clicker? Sorry. We could just keep talking about Phil. But yeah, as Phil briefly introduced, I published this book called Filter World in January 2024. And it was, thank you. Yeah, the subtitle of Filter World is How Algorithms Flattened Culture. And in this talk, I want to describe kind of the thesis of the book, but also move past that, past the homogenization and talk about what's going on the internet now and like how the internet has changed even in the past, 5 or 10 years. And talk about why I still have some optimism for what's going on. So the sections of the talk, I'm going to start by talking about like the spread of social media and how it's kind of taken over what we pay attention to. I'm going to move a little bit toward how we can resist what algorithms have done to us and how they've kind of taken over. And the most immediate point to hand, which we've been discussing a lot during the summit, is the emergence of generative AI. And I mean, what we've really been seeing in the US at this moment is the allegiance between Silicon Valley AI companies and the United States government under Donald Trump. And I think that's, a frightening thing to witness, but also worth breaking down, like where that ideology comes from. So I want to start with this quote from Rem Koolhaas from 1995 from his essay, The Generic City. And it's, convergence is only possible at the price of shedding identity. That is usually seen as a loss. But at the scale at which it occurs, it must mean something. What are the disadvantages of identity? And conversely, what are the advantages of blankness? And I think a lot of my work in the past decade or so was kind of about the advantages of blankness. Like Rem Koolhaas was working in that kind of era of starchitecture and during the globalization of architecture. And that kind of globalized aesthetic was something relatively new, the same kinds of buildings, the same kinds of architects across the world. And he, this essay is very ambiguous and critical and ambivalent, but I think at that time, at least, there was a kind of sense of possibility that maybe the homogenization of globalization had some new meaning or had some utopian possibility. And I think the crisis that we're entering right now is seeing that that was not necessarily the case. And so Filter World, the title of the book, I wanted to come up with a single word that reflected this state that we're in right now, which is that the internet and digital platforms kind of act as a filter for so much of the culture that we consume. So not just information or news articles, but music and videos and visual art. It influences who we talk to and how we reach other people. What kinds of art that reaches us is like determined by these feeds that we look at all day long. So I wanted to think of these different visual metaphors maybe for how digital platforms and algorithmic feeds work. And I think a funnel kind of directs our attention toward one specific thing. Like at the end of each feed, there's one idea or one aesthetic or one kind of creativity that results from it. A bubble surrounds us and it blocks us from the world. It mediates our experience and kind of warps what's around us through its lens. And then this air filter, I mean, I think we all know now how social media blocks some kinds of information and lets through others. So I think all told, the internet and digital platforms have become this like scrim through which we experience the world, and we're often encouraged to ignore its existence, or just kind of think that it doesn't exist, think that it's not influencing us, even though it is. And we've lived through the 2010s through this era of algorithmification, I guess you could call it. And if you think back to the earlier days of social media, like late 2000s, early 2010s, these digital platforms were just linear feeds of content. Like it was just a list of posts from the most recent to the oldest. And that really started changing. I think in the process of researching my book, I realized that between 2015 and 2016, all of these different apps that we use, the different streaming platforms, even Amazon homepage, these all became more algorithmic. So an algorithm, a recommendation algorithm, is an equation that chooses bits of content or bits of information based on your own previous actions and the actions of everyone across the platform. And then it uses all of that data to select what might appeal to you the most. So the output might be a song, it might be an article, it might be the next YouTube video. And I think in the mid-2010s, we reached this state where there was so much content on the internet that it needed to be filtered. Like we were all posting so much more, we couldn't just consume a list of posts. And so the algorithms became necessary, but I think over the latter half of the 2010s, they became completely overwhelming. And we can see with the advent of TikTok, which became one of the fastest growing digital platforms, I think the epiphany of TikTok was that people don't want to choose what they look at. Like they want to be fed this passive feed of content, and that's what worked the best. So we've kind of reached this peak of the algorithm. And I think the consequence of algorithms filtering all of this culture that we consume is a kind of like generic globalized culture. And my first hint at that, or what made me start thinking about it, was traveling a lot as a freelance journalist and encountering the same kind of coffee shop everywhere I went. So whatever city I landed in, you could go to Reykjavik, or Kyoto, or Beijing, or Mexico City, or Los Angeles, or anywhere. And you could open Google Maps or Yelp and type in hipster coffee shop, and you would find a place that looked a lot like these places. So this whole aesthetic of reclaimed wood furniture and like vague mid-century stuff and pendant lamps and subway tile. And of course, you could get your cappuccino with your perfect latte art. You could probably order an avocado toast. And there was no like corporation telling these places how to decorate their shops. This was not like a Starbucks. It wasn't a kind of McDonald's, corporate homogenization. It was all these independent shops and independent people choosing to drift toward the same aesthetics. And I think over time, my hypothesis was that what had changed in this moment, like circa 2015, 2016, was that social media and digital platforms became more multimedia. They connected hundreds of millions of people suddenly in real time all over the world. And the algorithmic feeds that operated them promoted these particular aesthetics that worked for everyone across the platform. So there are particular vibes, there are particular decoration styles or trends that just become ubiquitous across one platform or another. And so I think this coffee shop aesthetic to me was one of the early examples. And this German guy, a consultant named Igor Schwartzman, once told me that this was a harmonization of taste. It was a kind of coming together around the world of people's cultural preferences. And there was a fluency that developed between places. Like you could go somewhere else across the world and still feel comfortable in the same coffee shop. You could feel like you found something of yourself there, or you found a space that reflected your tastes and identity. And I think there are benefits to that. It can be really comfortable. It can be comforting to find a familiar space. And I think it was a representation of like the new globalized cultural circuits as well. As we know in the art world, people travel all over and they tend to consume similar things no matter where they go. But there's also a kind of negative aspect to this harmonization of taste, which is that you lose the uniqueness of specific places, and you lose maybe the locality or specificity of your own taste, because often you are outsourcing or exporting your cultural choices to these algorithms when you pay too much attention to an Instagram feed or a TikTok feed. And so I think that kind of homogenization or flattening happens across all areas of culture now. I mean, I think my theory is kind of that since digital platforms have taken over cultural distribution, since they've taken over filmmaking and listening to music and distributing visual art, they put a lot of pressure on creators to conform their work to whatever works for that platform. Because right now, it's really hard to be an artist or a writer or any kind of creator without battling the platforms to have your work be seen or your voice heard. And I think this example, there are just trends that you start noticing everywhere. And I think one of the recent trends is this boucle fabric that has suddenly, made its way around the world and has become a signal of algorithmic post-globalization good taste. And I think I recently did a design podcast, and this was like the number one most annoying thing that the designers had to deal with. They were like, no more boucle, please. We are sick of this trend. But this little like step-by-step process here I think was so funny, because on the left you have the Pierre Généré Chandigarh chair, which is a kind of known design icon, which was actually designed by an Indian woman. And then the Généré chair became this kind of symbol of really good taste. It's a rarefied object. It's like an artifact of the art world. And you see it kind of transformed into this, West Elm boucle creation that fits perfectly into, Kim Kardashian's house. And so it's this transition of a localized, specific, historical, context-heavy object into a liquid, distributed, generic, aesthetic creation. And I think that, like, the boucle Généré chair on the right is a product of the internet and a product of globalized taste. It doesn't really make sense without this, like, state that we've entered into. And the same thing kind of happened in the art world in the mid-2010s with this era of zombie formalism, which, it kind of felt like a trend that came and went. But these are paintings by Lucian Smith and Jacob Cassé. And zombie formalism was kind of a critical term, but it reflected partly this era of painting that was made for Instagram. It was made to be visible on Instagram. It was made to be distributed across Instagram. And I think that moment was also when collectors began buying over Instagram and began buying JPEGs as much as they were buying actual objects. So I think the pressure to conform to the platform, the pressure to make your work function in those spaces is kind of unavoidable at this point. And I think it's shaped our consumer identities as well. So this is my kind of most recent aesthetic obsession, which is the cozy gaming lifestyle. I don't know if this has reached any of you. But on TikTok, you can find all of these videos of mostly young women sitting in these elaborate gaming desk setups surrounded by warm colors and soft wood and ambient light with kind of neon colors behind them. And it's this kind of immersive, like, total work of art environment in which they sit and play video games. So they're like fully plugged in to this multi-sensory digital experience. And it's almost as if, like, the coziness to me is feeling like your body does not exist. Like, you wrap yourself in soft blankets. You might have a boucle chair that you sit on. You can see in the middle here this woman wrapped up in blankets, pushing a remote control to turn the pages on her Kindle, sipping from her Stanley mug, like, just fully immersed in her experience of content consumption. And I think that this is the state that the algorithmic feeds put us in. Like they turn us into, I don't know, I most often think of like foie gras ducks, like gavage. Like we are force-fed all of this stuff and encouraged to just fill ourselves with it as much as possible and consume as much content as we can. And in the cozy gaming aesthetic, this is kind of seen as an aspirational state, like to just be subject to digital sensory experience and completely isolate yourself from the world. But at the same time, it's an aestheticized experience. Like I find it interesting that even in the midst of this like totally overwhelming digital landscape, people are still making something out of it. They are reclaiming it by aestheticizing it and formalizing it. And I think this like banality of experience was driven home for me when I looked up every photo of a coffee I've ever taken on my phone. And it just makes you sick a little bit, the like repetition and the need or the feeling of a need to document your life and post it online. So I think that is leading to a lot of antipathy toward algorithms and toward recommendations. Here are some anti-algorithm memes. So I think there's like a folk culture now that algorithms on the internet have become overwhelming and they have turned us into these passive consumers, and they're actively warping our tastes and desires away from what we might organically have, if we can say that anything is that organic. But I talk to a lot of Gen Z internet users and they feel confused about what they like or what they want because their interests and their desires are so dictated by the algorithmic feed that now they want to kind of rebel against it. Like the algorithm has become an adversary, I think, more so than a helpful curator or assistant. And so I think the internet, like none of us are getting off the internet for better or worse. Like it's here. We are consuming a lot of content through it. And I think it's not that the internet is bad, it's that the digital platforms that we've gotten used to over the past decade have been really exploitative and manipulative for us and quite bad for culture in general. I think as we discussed in some of the debate sections, the incentives of Spotify are not the incentives of musicians. Mark Zuckerberg is not a cultural mastermind, and I do not want to live in Sam Altman's cultural world. Like I want good curators, I want good artists, I want people who take those cultural forms seriously as culture and not just as content and grist for attention. So I think these platforms are some more niche digital platforms, streaming services, social networks that allow you to consume culture in a more sustainable or focused way that can help you improve your taste or deepen your taste or find more unusual things. Here, Adagio is a streaming service for classical music. Crunchyroll is a streaming service just for anime. Criterion Channel is for art films. Bandcamp allows you to actually buy music from the musicians you like, which is much more helpful than streaming. And particularly now, moving into the future, artists and all kinds of creatives are being pushed into this role of the creator. And the creator is like the new influencer. It's the person who makes their career online, builds up a community, maybe takes subscription fees from them or sells advertising to them. And I find it really interesting how some artists, actually, visual artists, have turned to this form. Here we have Brad Trommel, Artie Vierkant, and Joshua Citarella, who have all built these like digital native communities around their practice, essentially, and they have fans who pay them. And that is how they sustain their career. And I find that a really interesting mode of resistance to the massive scale digital platform. Like they are not just trying to get popular on TikTok, they are trying to build their own small scale digital space through videos, through audio, and kind of just broadcast their ideas in a different way. And there are still more apps and systems that allow you to have more niche interactions online and build smaller communities. Like right now, social media has been so bad and so out of control that I think all of our group chats are like a great alternative of just communicating with a small set of people and sharing things that you find online, sharing what you think is good. And I think that kind of like social recommendations, human to human, is the direction we're going in. And now we are moving into the AI era with replica assistants on the left and Google search and the AI Pope. And I think my gut instinct is that where algorithmic recommendations kind of encouraged people to be generic and to conform their work, but AI often is just spitting out that generic form. It's spitting out the generic coffee shop to begin with. And it's not even using the human creativity. It's just shortcutting to that most appealing common denominator. I think I have to wrap up. But these are two real tweets or posts on X from the United States White House account. And these, on the left, is an ASMR video of people being deported. And if anyone knows, ASMR is supposed to be this kind of soothing, gentle, ambient digital experience. And yet, you know, the Trump-Musk White House has decided that what would soothe people is clanking chains as people get put on planes to get deported. And on the right, maybe the most recent governmental meme, OpenAI recently demonstrated this ability for its new ChatGPT to generate images in the style of Studio Ghibli. And so, of course, the White House used this to make a cute cartoon of a, you know, hypothetical drug dealer getting arrested. And to me, these images, which are real and real people in the government decided to post online, demonstrate the instantaneousness of the, you know, negative application of AI. Like, AI is already causing these problems. So that's it. My vision for culture in the future is a beautiful farmer's market where we all pay our local musician and our local painter and hang out with our friends on the street consuming nice culture, one boutique at a time. And I hope that the internet and our interactions can look more like that in the future. Thank you.